story from Illinois. Mom shut the door every time he came into my room. I was only 8. The house was quiet, but inside my room, the silence was heavy, like it was waiting to break. I was only 8 years old when it began. Those nights when he would come into my room, I never knew exactly when it would happen, but I always felt it coming. The sound of footsteps on the creaky wooden stairs, slow and deliberate, sent chills down my spine. Mom always shut the door when he came in, not gently, not softly, but slammed it shut as if to lock me away from everything else. I didn't understand why she did it. Maybe she thought it was protecting me, or maybe it was to hide the truth. All I knew was that once the door shut, I felt trapped, alone, scared. My bed was my only refuge. I would curl up, hugging my knees, trying to make myself as small as possible. Sometimes I prayed, but even then the fear would not leave. I could hear the muffled voices, his voice low and angry, Mom's quiet sobs. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs felt frozen, and my mouth stayed shut. During the day, Mom would smile and act like nothing was wrong, but at night the house felt different. The air was colder, the shadows longer. I wanted to tell someone, anyone, but I was too afraid. Who would believe me? What would happen if I told? As the night stretched on, the silence after the door slammed grew louder in my ears. It was a silence that spoke of secrets too heavy for a child's heart. I wanted Mom to protect me, to save me from the fear. But every time he came in and the door slammed, I felt like I was being shut out, not just of the room, but from the safety I craved. The days blurred together in a haze of whispered secrets and hidden tears. At school, I put on a brave face. I played with my friends, laughed at silly jokes, and tried to forget the heaviness waiting for me at home. But every time the sun began to set, the knot in my stomach grew tighter. The moment I stepped through the front door, the world changed. Mom's smiles became smaller, more forced, like she was wearing a mask that was too heavy for her to carry. She never looked me in the eye, and I could see the exhaustion in her face, the kind of tired that sleep can't fix. Sometimes I caught her standing in the kitchen, staring out the window, her hands trembling as she held a cup of cold coffee. I remember the day I finally tried to speak. It was a quiet afternoon, and the house felt too empty. I found Mom sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes distant. I gathered every ounce of courage I had and whispered, "Mom, why do you close the door when he comes in?" She didn't answer at first. Her breath caught, and her hands gripped the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles turned white. Then, with a voice barely louder than a sigh, she said, "I'm trying to protect you, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, but I promise, I'm doing my best." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that she was a shield between me and the scary things in the dark. But the silence that followed her words told me more than anything she said. It was the silence of a secret too painful to share, a burden too heavy for a little girl. That night when he came in again, I stayed awake longer than usual. I listened to the footsteps, the whispered voices, and the door slamming shut. But this time, the silence didn't just scare me, it made me angry. Angry at the fear, angry at the secrets, and angry at the loneliness that had become my shadow. I began to understand that this was not something I could fix on my own, that the safety I craved had to come from somewhere outside the walls of my room, outside the closed doors. But how? I was just a kid. How do you fight something so big when you're so small? The days that followed were like walking through a fog, heavy, confusing, and isolating. At school, teachers asked if I was okay. Classmates whispered behind my back, and I felt like I was living in two different worlds, the one outside, bright and full of life, and the one inside my house, dark and filled with dread. I learned quickly to stay quiet, to make myself small, hoping to avoid attention, but no matter how hard I tried, the fear followed me everywhere. It sat on my chest like a weight, making it hard to breathe or think about anything else. I didn't know how to tell anyone. The shame was like a secret prison, locking me away from help. Mom started to change too. Some days she was distant, her eyes glassy and empty. Other days she was sharp and tense, like she was holding back a storm. I noticed the bruises on her arms and the way she flinched when he raised his voice. I wanted to protect her, but I was just a child, powerless and scared. One afternoon I found her crying quietly in the kitchen, the sun casting long shadows across the floor. I wanted to comfort her, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I sat beside her, holding her hand with all the strength I could find. That small moment, her head resting on my shoulder, our tears mingling, was the closest we got to a wordless promise that we were not alone. But the silence around us remained loud. Nobody from school, from church, or even our neighbors seemed to notice the cracks in our lives. I learned that people often looked away when they didn't want to face what was hidden beneath the surface. That realization made me feel even more alone. One evening, after a particularly bad day, I sat by my bedroom window, looking out at the stars. I wished for a way out, for someone to hear my silent prayers. I wished for a life where the door wouldn't shut in my face, where I could feel safe again. That night, I decided I had to be brave, not just for me, but for Mom too. I whispered into the darkness that I would find a way to change things, even if I didn't know how yet. Somewhere deep inside, a small spark of hope flickered. It was fragile, but it was there. Days turned into weeks, and the invisible walls around me seemed to grow thicker. I learned to speak in whispers, or not at all when he was around. Each creak of the floorboards, every shadow in the hall, made my heart race with a fear I couldn't shake. My safe place, the room I once loved, felt more like a cage. The door shutting behind him was a sound I dreaded. It wasn't just a physical barrier. It was a sign that whatever peace I hoped for was being stolen away. Mom tried to be strong, but the weight of our secret hung heavy on her shoulders. I remember one afternoon when I saw her sitting on the edge of the couch, her face buried in her hands, trembling. I wanted to run to her, to tell her it would be okay, but I was too scared myself. Instead, I sat nearby, feeling helpless. School became a place to escape, but even there, the echoes of home followed me. I was quieter than before, hiding behind my books and pretending the world outside was a story I could control. But the silence inside my chest screamed louder than anything anyone could hear. Sometimes I wondered if anyone even noticed that the little girl who used to laugh so freely had disappeared. One day, during recess, a new teacher named Mrs. Jacobs noticed something was wrong. She pulled me aside gently, her voice soft but concerned. "Is everything okay at home?" she asked. I wanted to scream no, to tell her everything, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I nodded, pretending that I was fine. That evening, I lay awake in my bed, the dark room swallowing me whole. The shadows on the walls seemed alive, twisting into shapes of fear and confusion. But then, I thought about Mrs. Jacobs' kind eyes and the way she seemed to care. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of this darkness. I started to dream of a life where the door didn't slam shut, where voices weren't whispers of fear, but words of love. I imagined holding Mom's hand, walking into the sunlight, free from the shadows that haunted us. It was a fragile hope, but it was the first step, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a small flicker of courage. The next morning, the sun filtered softly through the cracked blinds of my room, painting stripes of light and shadow on the worn carpet. For a moment, I let myself pretend it was just another ordinary day. But beneath the calm surface, the tension pulsed like a silent drumbeat, a rhythm I had learned to live by. At school, Mrs. Jacobs approached me again during recess. This time she didn't ask. She simply said, "I'm here if you need someone to talk to." Her words wrapped around me like a fragile lifeline. I wanted to reach out, to break the silence, but the fear kept me frozen. How could I explain that home wasn't safe, that the very people who were supposed to protect me sometimes hurt me the most? One afternoon, as I walked home from school, I noticed a small flyer on the bulletin board at the community center. It was about a counseling program for children facing tough times. The word safe space stood out in bold letters. For the first time, I wondered if maybe there was a place where I could be heard, where my fears wouldn't be ignored or dismissed. That night, I clutched the flyer tightly, hiding it under my pillow. My heart raced with a mix of hope and dread. Would Mom be angry if she found out? Would it make things worse? I didn't know, but the idea of having someone to talk to, someone outside my family, felt like a secret promise of help. Days passed, and I watched Mom from afar, seeing the lines of worry deepen on her face. She tried to keep a brave front, but I saw her sitting alone sometimes, tears silently tracing paths down her cheeks. I wished I could tell her I was scared, that I needed her more than ever, but the fear of causing more pain kept my lips sealed. One evening, as the house settled into uneasy quiet, Mom called me into the kitchen. Her voice was softer than usual. "Sweetheart, "I've been thinking," she said hesitantly. "Maybe we should talk to someone, for both of us." My breath caught. Could this be the moment things started to change? I nodded slowly, a fragile spark of hope glowing inside me. Maybe we weren't alone anymore. That night, as I lay in bed, the door didn't slam shut. Instead, it creaked open slowly. Mom peeked in, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and determination. She smiled faintly and whispered, "I love you." For the first time in a long time, those words felt like a lifeline reaching through the darkness. The days that followed felt like walking through a fog, uncertain and heavy, but somehow lighter than before. Mom and I started going to the community center together. The counseling room was small and warmly lit, with soft chairs and calming colors. It smelled faintly of lavender and old books. I remember sitting there, my hands clenched in my lap, watching Mom across the room. She looked tired but hopeful, like she was trying to find a path out of the darkness for both of us. The counselor, a gentle woman named Mrs. Allen, didn't ask many questions at first. Instead, she let us speak when we were ready. Mom talked about her own fears, the pressure of keeping the family together, and the guilt she carried for not protecting me better. I said little, but I listened. Listening felt safer. One afternoon, as Mom and I walked home from the center, she held my hand a little tighter. The neighborhood didn't seem so frightening with her by my side. For the first time, I imagined a future where the shadows wouldn't reach into my room. Maybe one day the door wouldn't have to be shut tight, and laughter could fill the hallways again. Back at home, things didn't change overnight. The silence in the evenings was still thick, and sometimes Mom's temper flared, old wounds running deep. But now, between the harsh words, there were moments of tenderness. A soft touch on my shoulder, a quiet "I'm sorry," or a shared look that said we were trying. Those little cracks in the wall of fear let in just enough light to keep me going. School became a refuge too. I started drawing again, sketching scenes of places I dreamed about, wide open fields, sunny skies and houses with open doors. Mrs. Jacobs noticed and praised my drawings, telling me I had a gift. For once, someone saw me beyond the scared, quiet kid. One night, lying in bed, I thought about the past years, the secrets, the fear and the silence. I realized that healing wasn't a straight line. There would be days when the darkness came back, but there were also days when hope took its place, no matter how small. I closed my eyes and whispered a promise to myself to keep fighting, to keep hoping, and to never let that door shut again. The next months were a fragile dance between fear and healing. At home, the air still carried tension, but the sharp edges dulled with time. Mom was trying, really trying. Some nights she would sit beside me on my bed, her hand warm against mine, telling me stories from when she was young, stories filled with laughter and hope. It was as if she was trying to reclaim a piece of herself she'd lost long ago, and in doing so she reached out to me. I began to understand that Mom's anger was tangled with her own pain from things she never said, from sacrifices I couldn't yet grasp. The counselor helped us speak through those silences. We learned how to say "I'm scared" without fear of breaking apart, how to ask for forgiveness without shame. It was messy and slow, but every small step was a victory. At school, I found comfort in my art class. Mrs. Jacobs encouraged me to share my drawings with others, and slowly I opened up. My classmates began to see me as more than the quiet girl who always sat alone. One day, a girl named Mia handed me a drawing she made and said, "You're really talented." For the first time in a long while, I smiled without pretending, but the shadows weren't gone. Sometimes at night I would wake up to footsteps or muffled voices. The old fear would curl tight in my chest, making it hard to breathe. I learned to clutch my little flashlight and whisper to myself, "You're safe. You're safe." Mom's presence on the other side of the door was a comfort, even if the door was still closed. There was a day when everything seemed to break open. Mom came home later than usual, her eyes red from crying. She sat me down and with a shaky voice, told me about her own childhood, the secrets she'd carried, the pain she'd buried. For the first time I saw the woman behind the fear. She wasn't perfect, but she was trying to be better. For me. For herself. We cried together that night, not just for the past but for the future too. A future where silence wouldn't be our prison, where the door to my room could stay open wide, inviting and free. Healing was still a long road ahead, but that night I felt the first true breath of hope, the kind that stays, even when the darkness tries to creep back in. Life began to shift in small, almost imperceptible ways. The door to my room no longer slammed shut each time someone entered. Instead, it creaked open. Sometimes just a crack, sometimes all the way. signaling a quiet truce between my world and Mom's. Those moments, though rare, became beacons of hope I clung to during the long days. School was no longer just an escape, it became a place where I could dream. Mrs. Jacobs noticed the change too. "Your art is evolving," she said gently one afternoon. "There's a new strength in your lines." I didn't say much, but inside I felt like a seedling breaking through the cracked earth toward sunlight. My drawings began to tell stories, not just of fear or sadness, but of resilience and courage. The blank pages were mine to fill, and that power was intoxicating. Yet despite progress, the past lingered like a shadow refusing to fade. Some nights memories slipped through the cracks. I'd wake gasping, the taste of fear thick on my tongue. Mom's footsteps outside my door were no longer threats but reminders of the fragile safety she was trying to build. One night when the silence was too loud, I whispered, "I'm here," not just to myself but to her too. That simple phrase became a bridge spanning the chasm between us. Our counselor became a lifeline. Each session peeled back layers I hadn't known I carried. The guilt, the confusion, the longing for love in a world that often felt cold. Mom and I sat side by side, sharing pieces of ourselves we'd hidden for too long. Sometimes we spoke through tears, other times through silence, but always with an unspoken promise to heal together. Outside the walls of our home, kindness bloomed unexpectedly. A neighbor's smile, a friend's invitation to join a weekend picnic, a teacher's gentle encouragement, all threads weaving a safety net beneath me. For the first time, I understood that healing wasn't just an internal battle, but a community effort. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Mom knocked softly and slipped into my room. She didn't say much, just sat beside me and reached for my hand. That touch spoke volumes. It said, "I'm here, I'm trying." And in that moment, I realized so was I. The road ahead was uncertain, winding through valleys of doubt and peaks of hope, but with each step, the weight of those closed doors lightened. We were no longer prisoners of the past, but architects of a future, where love, though imperfect, could still grow. The months that followed were a blend of progress and setbacks, each day a step forward or a stumble backward. Healing wasn't linear. It was a tangled path I navigated with uneven footing. Some mornings, I woke with a lightness I hadn't felt in years. Other days, the weight of my past pressed down, threatening to pull me under. But I was learning, slowly, to breathe through the fear. Mom and I started to build routines that didn't revolve around pain. We cooked dinners together, her laughter more frequent and genuine than before. There were mornings when she'd make pancakes just to see me smile. Those small acts were revolutionary, quiet revolutions against years of silence and hurt. School became a sanctuary, in ways I never imagined. I joined the art club, surrounded by kids who saw me not as a broken girl, but as someone with a voice worth hearing. My sketches evolved into paintings filled with color and light, telling stories not just of survival, but of hope and transformation. The teachers noticed, the counselors praised, and for the first time, I saw a future shimmering beyond the shadows of my past. Counseling sessions deepened our connection. Mom and I uncovered the roots of her own pain, an inheritance of silence and struggle that had trickled down generations. We confronted harsh truths together, sometimes breaking down, other times holding each other up. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Forgiveness became more than a word. It became a bridge we crossed one trembling step at a time. Outside the house, new friendships blossomed. A girl named Maya became a constant presence, steady and kind, a reminder that not all relationships were fraught with fear. She showed me how to laugh freely, to trust again, and to find strength in vulnerability. With her, I discovered the simple power of being seen and accepted, yet the scars beneath my skin remained. Nightmares visited, unwelcome but fading, their grip loosening as daylight returned. When fear whispered, I learned to answer with courage, whispering back my own truths. "You do not define me." Those mantras became armor. One afternoon, as autumn leaves danced outside my window, Mom brought out an old photo album. We turned pages together, images of happier times, of family gatherings, of me as a carefree child. Tears mingled with smiles as we remembered who we once were, and who we still could become. I realized then that healing wasn't about erasing the past, but embracing it, knowing the darkness made the light even more precious. Mom's hands, once clenched in frustration, now held mine gently. Our journey wasn't over, but for the first time, it felt possible. The closed doors had begun to open, not just between us, but within ourselves. And as the sun set, casting golden hues across our small living room, I knew we were no longer prisoners, but survivors, ready to write new chapters, filled with hope, love, and unbreakable strength. The tension in the house remained, but something fragile had begun to shift. Mom didn't slam the door anymore when he came into my room. Instead, she lingered outside, her breath steady, hesitant. I learned to read the silence between us, the space where words had once been weapons. It was in that silence I found a sliver of peace. School became my refuge. The art room was my sanctuary, a place where the chaos of home faded into color and canvas. I poured all the confusion, fear, and hope into my drawings. Each brushstroke was a small rebellion against the pain that tried to drown me. Teachers noticed the change. One pulled me aside, saying, "You have a gift, don't let anything steal it." The nights were still the hardest. Shadows whispered old fears, and sometimes I woke gasping, lost in memories I couldn't shake. But over time, I learned to breathe through the panic, to remind myself I was no longer a helpless child. I was stronger. I was surviving. Mom and I tried to talk awkwardly at first, then with growing honesty. She shared pieces of her own past, the hurts she carried silently. I realized her walls were made of her own pain, and maybe that explained why she shut the door on me so often. Forgiveness wasn't instant, but understanding took root. One day, Dad came home late. He knocked softly, waited. When he finally entered, there was no shouting, no anger, just a quiet acknowledgement between us all that something had to change. He sat beside me, his voice low. "I'm sorry." It was the first time I'd heard those words, and they cracked something inside me. Slowly the house softened. The walls didn't feel so cold. Doors opened, literally and metaphorically, and as autumn gave way to winter, I realized I was no longer trapped in fear. I was beginning to heal. The seasons changed, and with them, so did the rhythm of our lives. The cold winter nights were quieter, less heavy. I found comfort in small routines, helping Mom with dinner, walking the dog around the block, sitting by the window watching the world turn gray. Each ordinary moment felt like a gift I hadn't appreciated before. School was no longer just a refuge. It became a place where I could dream again. I joined the art club, surrounded by kids who didn't know my story and didn't ask. Their laughter was light, free. I learned that friendship could be gentle, not just a battlefield. I began to see a future beyond the walls of our small house in Illinois. Mom started therapy. I could tell it was hard for her to face the past, but she kept going, day after day. When she shared a little of what she learned, I listened. For the first time, I saw her as a person struggling to heal, not just the strict woman who had slammed the door on me so many times. Our conversations grew deeper, filled with apologies and hope. Dad's visits became more frequent, his apologies more sincere. He tried to make amends in small ways, fixing things around the house, helping with homework, even attending my school art shows. It wasn't perfect, and there were setbacks, but it was progress. One evening, after a long day at school, I found Mom sitting quietly on the couch, tears streaming down her face. I sat beside her, took her hand. No words were needed. In that moment, the years of pain seemed to unravel, replaced by a fragile peace. I realized healing was not linear. Some days were harder than others, but the cracks in our family were slowly filling with something stronger: love, resilience, forgiveness. And in the quiet moments when the world felt still, I knew I was no longer just a scared 8-year-old. I was a survivor, ready to write my own story. The summer brought a cautious kind of hope. The sun warmed the cracked sidewalks of our neighborhood, and with it, my heart began to thaw in ways I hadn't thought possible. I spent more time outside, riding my bike past familiar places that no longer felt quite so heavy with memories. Each pedal forward was a small victory over the fear that had clung to me for years. Mom and I had grown closer. She no longer slammed doors or withdrew behind cold silences. Instead, she opened up, revealing scars I hadn't known she carried. One afternoon, as we sat on the porch swing, she told me about her own childhood, about pain, mistakes, and the strength it took to keep moving forward. Her voice was soft but firm, and in it I heard a woman determined to rewrite her story, just as I was learning to rewrite mine. Dad surprised us both by showing up unannounced one weekend. His eyes were tired, but there was a genuine warmth in his smile. He brought home pizza, the kind I liked, and for a few hours we shared a meal without arguing or silence, just laughter and stories. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start, a fragile bridge across years of distance. School had become a place where I felt seen, not just as the girl who had endured, but as someone with dreams and talents. My art teacher encouraged me to submit a painting to a city exhibit, and when my work was accepted, I felt a surge of pride that chased away the shadows of self-doubt. Yet the past was never far. Some nights when the house was quiet and the dark pressed close, memories crept back in like unwelcome guests. But I faced them differently now, armed with the knowledge that I was stronger than those fears. I had survived the silence, the pain and the loneliness. I was more than my scars. One evening after a school event, Mom and I walked home under a sky painted with stars. She squeezed my hand gently and said, "You're my greatest gift." In that moment, I understood that healing was no longer a distant dream, but a living, breathing reality we were creating together, one day, one step at a time. The days that followed were filled with cautious optimism, but healing was never linear. Some mornings I woke feeling lighter, hopeful even. Other days, the weight of what I had endured pressed heavily on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Yet through it all, I clung to the small moments of peace. Mom's warm hugs, the encouraging words from my teachers, and the quiet satisfaction of finishing a drawing that captured my dreams. At school, I began joining clubs, slowly stepping out of the shadows. The art club became a refuge, a place where I could express what words failed to capture. My classmates didn't see the scared little girl anymore. They saw someone passionate, creative, and resilient. It felt like a fresh start. Mom and Dad were trying too. Their interactions were still tentative, but at least they were talking, working through old wounds. I overheard them one evening, voices low but sincere, promising to be better for me, for us. It gave me hope that maybe our fractured family could find a way to mend. But old habits die hard. One afternoon after a tense argument, Mom shut herself in her room for hours. I sat outside, heart aching, waiting for the door to open. When it finally did, she looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "I'm sorry. I'm trying." Those words, simple and raw, meant everything. I started seeing a counselor at school. At first I was hesitant, unsure if anyone could understand, but slowly I learned to open up, sharing pieces of my story I'd kept locked away. It was hard, painful even, but it was also freeing. The counselor helped me realize I wasn't alone, that my feelings were valid. One day she gave me a journal and told me to write whatever came to mind, no matter how messy. I filled those pages with my fears, my hopes, my anger, and my dreams. Writing became a lifeline, a way to process the storm inside me. As autumn approached, the leaves changing colors mirrored my own transformation. I wasn't the same scared child who had endured silence and isolation. I was growing, stronger, wiser, ready to face whatever came next. The road ahead wasn't clear, but for the first time, I believed I could walk it with courage. The holidays arrived, bringing with them both warmth and unease. The house was decorated with twinkling lights and homemade ornaments, yet beneath the festive cheer, tension lingered like an uninvited guest. Family gatherings became a delicate dance, everyone trying to avoid old wounds while searching for new beginnings. One chilly evening, I sat by the window, watching snowflakes drift lazily to the ground. The quiet outside contrasted sharply with the whirlwind inside me. Memories surfaced unbidden, the times Mom shut her door, Dad's distant gaze, the nights I wished I could disappear. Yet I also remembered the small victories, a smile shared, a kind word, the promise of tomorrow. School was changing too. Teachers noticed my growing confidence. I was no longer the withdrawn girl. I spoke up, joined debates, and even helped organize a charity drive. Each step felt like reclaiming a part of myself that had been lost. My friends became a chosen family, people who saw me, truly saw me, without judgment or fear. At home, Mom started attending therapy regularly. She invited me to join a few sessions, wanting to bridge the gap that years of silence had created. It wasn't easy. We stumbled over old scars and painful truths, but with each conversation, the walls came down a little more, revealing two souls desperate to heal. One night after a particularly honest talk, Mom hugged me tightly and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on us." Her words wrapped around me like a warm blanket, soothing the cold ache inside. I began dreaming again of college, of traveling, of a life unburdened by fear, the journal by my bedside, filled with plans and hopes, a testament to resilience. I knew the journey ahead would still have shadows, but now I carried a light strong enough to guide me through, and in that light I found strength, not just to survive, but to live fully, fiercely, and without apology. As spring unfolded, so did my understanding of forgiveness, not just for others, but for myself. The wounds from childhood, once raw and bleeding, began to form scars, proof that I had survived. I learned that healing was not linear. Some days were breakthroughs, others setbacks, yet each moment was a step forward. School became my refuge. I threw myself into projects, clubs, anything that allowed me to express the storm inside. Art class became my sanctuary. Painting scenes of hope and freedom, I poured out feelings too complex for words. My canvas spoke when my voice faltered. Mom and I kept attending therapy. Those sessions were difficult, filled with tears and confessions, but also laughter and growth. She started sharing stories of her own childhood, the battles she fought silently. I saw her not just as my mother, but as a woman shaped by pain and resilience. Our bond, fragile before, strengthened with each honest conversation. One afternoon, we planted a small garden together. As we dug into the earth, planting seeds of flowers and herbs, it felt symbolic, nurturing new life, new beginnings. The soil was cold and firm, but beneath, promise waited. Watching the first green shoots emerge weeks later, I felt a flicker of hope I hadn't dared to feel in years. Friends became lifelines. There was Maya, whose laughter filled my quiet moments with light, and Carlos, who believed in me when I doubted myself. They saw my past, but never defined me by it. Their friendship taught me the power of acceptance and unconditional support. With graduation approaching, anxiety crept in. Could I stand tall in front of the crowd? Could I claim the future I dreamed of? The fear was real, but so was the determination. I practiced my speech, rehearsed the smile I wanted to wear, and promised myself I wouldn't let the past steal this moment. On the day as my name was called, I stepped forward. The auditorium blurred, but I felt the steady beat of my heart, a rhythm of survival and hope. Walking across that stage, I wasn't just accepting a diploma. I was reclaiming my story, writing the next chapter with strength and courage.